John Jorgensen and his mighty band. John, who are these gentlemen here?
This is Jason Anik on the violin. Rick Reed on the percussion. Simon Planting on the bass. And Kevin Nolan on the guitar.
And he's Grammy Award-winning John Jorgensen. And so in addition to thanking the band, I would like to once again thank our sponsors. Our lead sponsor is Alcatel-Lucent, the guys that build municipal networks for Lafayette and other fine fiber optic cities. The Sunlight Foundation, the Millennium Communications Group, Google, Atlantic Online, and 37 Signals. And I wanted to say, as I was listening to the last panel, I was marveling at the people in this audience for whom we didn't have time. We didn't have time to put them on stage. There, I finally formed a complete sentence. We didn't have time to put on stage such experts and good speakers as Bruff Turner, who many people several people have referred to Bruff's great work over the course of this Freedom to Connect. Bruff is former CTO of a former company called NMS Communications, and a real entrepreneur and deeply knowledgeable in this field and several others. Norm Jackness, who isn't here right now, he is formerly, for 10 years, he was CTO of Westchester County and was responsible for putting in a lot of fiber in Westchester. Nancy Jesual had a similar role in Portland, Oregon. And Rolly Cole, hey, I think I just named 4 people who aren't in the room at this moment. See, I told you, gotta be in here. This is where the action is. I tried to create a conference where the hallway conversation occurs in here. I can hear that I wasn't quite successful, but that's kind of what this is all about. So, I met Dan Gilmore way long ago at a meeting when he was still tech columnist for the Mercury News, and I kept seeing him out in the hall even when nobody was out there, and I said, Dan, you're hanging out in the hall the whole conference, and he said, yeah, well, they never make news in the room. So, let's see. So we have here yet another expert communicator in multiple media, and Andy Revkin, his day job is reporter on the environment and the changes therein for the New York Times. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the New York Times is featured here yet again. We had Tom Friedman yesterday. Andy is actually going to begin by playing a song he wrote that has been stuck in my mind since I first heard it months ago, and I think it's just a fabulous song. It's called A Mighty Fine Line. Can we get the band up again? Band sound. Band sound in the house? There we go. Here.
Actually, I am truly a multimedia communicator. If I couldn't do music, I would definitely not be able to do journalism. And this song is essentially about complexity and uncertainty. I spent yesterday at the Climate Summit at the National Academy of Sciences, which is concluding today. And it's all about how you act based on uncertainty. It's a very fine line between winning and losing. Very fine line between living and dying. Very fine line between love and leaving. Most of your life you spend walking a very fine line. Five out of six odd numbers won't win you die. That cry over our heads and I'm not you may soon be mine. Your girls out the door say right things at the wrong time. Most of your life you spend walking a very fine line. But it's a very fine line that you got to walk. Gotta watch every word when you make small talk. Gotta watch every step you'll find yourself crazy and crying. Most of your life you spend walking a very fine line. A very fine line. A very fine line. It's a very fine line between living and sinning. A very fine line between loss and gain. A very fine line between pleasure and pain. Most of your life you spend walking that very fine line. People that think you're a genius are this far from pets. President loses an election by 0.5%. We all love hurts when we try it again and again. We know that the line between love and despair is so thin. It's a very fine line you got to walk. Gotta watch every word when you make small talk. Gotta watch every step or you'll find yourself crazy and crying. Most of your life you spend walking a very fine line. It's a very fine line that you got to walk. Gotta watch every word when you make small talk. Gotta watch every step or you'll find yourself crazy and crying. Most of your life you spend walking a very fine line. A very fine line. Life's a very fine line. It's a very fine line. Very fine line.
We'll hear more from Andy in a few minutes, but first I'd like to present my bosom buddy, my really, really good friend, Jim Baller, who's just one of the finest human beings who walks the face of this planet, and he's going to introduce the speaker. Jim.
Boy, that's something to live up to. But thank you. I feel exactly the same way. When David told me that this year's F2C was going to emphasize municipal broadband, and he asked me what I would like to do at this conference more than anything else, I thought about that for half a second, and I responded, I'd like to introduce Billy Ray. Now, have any of you heard of Billy Ray? Very small handful. That's why I need to do what I'm doing here. Billy is the father of municipal broadband, and by the time I'm done, you'll understand why. And that alone would be a good reason for introducing him to those of you. But there's more. 15 years ago, when we first met, Billy was talking about the connection between energy and environment And the very same things that we are just as a nation beginning to discover now, Billy was talking about 15 years ago. And that would be a reasonable basis for wanting to introduce him to you. And every year you hear me say that I believe that I am the most fortunate attorney walking the face of the earth because I have the kind of practice that enables me to work with communities to fulfill themselves through communications. And I had a mentor that helped me get to that position, and Billy's responsible for that too. But all of those aren't quite the exact reasons why I wanted to introduce Billy today. John Fitzgerald Kennedy had a statement that he used to make here that we appreciate in Washington, and it is, when somebody does you a slight, don't get mad, get even. And Billy, today is when I get even. Okay, so I met Billy in 1992 at a conference staged by the American Public Power Association to understand the significance for public power utilities of some amendments to the Cable Act that had been enacted that year. The purpose of these Cable Act amendments were to encourage competition in the cable industry, which by then had become very monopolistic. And APPA's conference was to discuss what the new amendments did and how it could work in the interests of public power utilities. And by then, Billy had already been in that field for 4 years, having developed a system of his own, and I trust you're going to talk about that, so I won't dwell on it. And at the end of the conference, APPA circulated a sign-up sheet in order to get members of the audience to agree to support hiring outside counsel to work with them in the wave of rulemakings that the FCC was going to initiate to write rules to implement the Act. My partner and I volunteered to do that as sort of a on-the-job learning experience for me. And during the following year, Billy was APPA's representative working on this project, and I was like a sponge absorbing an enormous amount of amazing information about how municipal utilities could use advanced communication services to cut down on their energy costs, to support demand-side management, to send crawlers across television screens advising people ironing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that if they just delayed a few hours or did it a few hours earlier, they could save the utility and themselves a great deal of money. And I would bring Billy over to the FCC. They'd have meetings with 15, 20 people there, and he would spellbind them about all the possibilities of municipal communications and about all the things that he was running into from his local competitors. Point after point, they listened very carefully, and they ended up writing a set of rules that were extremely favorable to new entrants into the cable field. And then over the years, those rules have stood up extremely well until now that technology has changed to a degree. Well, as we completed that year of work, I suggested to Billy and another fellow from APPA that we ought to write this up for the rest of the members of APPA to tell them what the rules were, how they could use them successfully. And Billy and Ted Combs, this other fellow, said, yeah, that'd be great. You do it. You write it up. And in addition to that, they gave me the honor of presenting the paper at the next APPA conference. And so this is Billy's, this is where I get back at Billy, you see. Billy introduced me at that second conference. And I was sitting there with my paper ready to go. I was going to tell the audience about all these things. And so Billy introduced me. And he introduced me, and as he did, he got into the substantive issues that we had been working with over the course of the year, and I scratched out that point. And then he got to another one, and I scratched out that point. And I went down the page, and by the time he was done, my page was filled. I had nothing left to say. And so I don't remember what I said. I sort of blanked that whole thing out. Well, Billy, I'm not going to steal your thunder today. I just want to give the audience a couple small things that will give them a sense of who you are and why what you've contributed we are all indebted to you for. About the time that I met Billy, he was operating the country's most advanced municipal cable system. What do you suppose the most popular television program was on the Glasgow, Kentucky municipal cable system? Now, this is a community of 14,000 in central southern part of Kentucky. So how about a couple of guesses? What do you suppose their most popular television program was?
UK basketball. There you go.
Okay, that's a good guess. Let's try some more.
Horse racing.
Horse racing, another good one. Two more guesses. 60 minutes. Okay, all right, fair enough. None of you is even close. I Love Lucy. Okay. Sesame Street. That's 5 guesses. Price is Right. Well, that's getting there. What was it? Small Claims Court. And that tells you a lot about the value of municipal cable to a community. That speaks volumes about why that network was important to Glasgow. What could be better than seeing your neighbors slugging it out in small claims court? All right, one more story, and I will get off the stage and let the other folks talk about these topics in greater detail. About 1997, shortly after the Telecom Act of 1996 was put into place, I brought Billy over to the Federal Communications Commission, and we met with Jim Casserly, who was then a senior staffer at the time, is now with Comcast. And Billy's message was, don't go overboard with regulation under the Telecommunications Act. We're doing remarkable things in Glasgow, Kentucky, and there are lots of other communities around the country that could do this too if you don't regulate them to death. Okay, so what are you doing? Well, we're offering broadband at 4 megs. 1997. This is a time when dial-up wasn't even around the country to any significant degree, and they were offering their connectivity at rates that were dial-up rates. And so Jim Casserly and the other aides are there looking at each other, asking directions to Glasgow, asking for housing prices in Glasgow, and so on and so forth. And then Billy talked about the need for a light touch on regulation, and Casserly said to Billy, oh, look, if you're going to get into this field, you got to be ready. If you're going to take advantage of this big opportunity, you're going to have to play by the same rules as the big players. And Billy's response to him was, well, in our community, we don't look at sidewalks and sewers as being a big opportunity, and we look at broadband as a utility the same way as we look at sewers and sidewalks and anything else. And that's another important message for you to remember about Billy and municipal broadband. And so I'm going to do what I did in San Francisco 15 years ago, which is just to stroke right through the other points I'm going to make and get off the stage and let you folks talk to Billy and his group.
Thank you. That was my former friend, Jim Ballard.
Yeah, I
Well, I have a spectacularly low-tech talk for you today. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm not going to play any instruments, and it's not because I choose not to. I have no idea how to do that. I am going to take whatever time that I have left after Jim Ballard did that, to talk to you a little bit about our project, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about the project. It's history. We're still in business, but perhaps I should take 5 or 10 minutes and explain to you why somebody with an accent like that is here talking to you. As Jim said, Glasgow is a small community, 14,000 people, South Central Kentucky, about as far from the bright center of the technological universe as you could possibly get in North America, anyway. My background is actually I'm a civil engineer. I've been doing electric utility work my whole career. I was born and raised in Glasgow, but went away to college and lived away for a few years, 10 years. Came back in the mid-'80s and immediately somehow was struck by this vision of how we could change the way we sell electricity and make electricity and distribute electricity if we could associate it with a telecommunications path. Now, at that time, I'd never heard of the word broadband. A few people had. We're talking about 1986. But I had this marvelous board. Most municipal systems are actually governed by a local board of directors. Sometimes they're elected, sometimes they're appointed. In Glasgow, they just happen to be appointed. And these 5 people hired me, and these 5 people were the first ones that I went to and said, we should think about building what I have come to understand to be called a broadband network that could serve many purposes for the community. But the 2 purposes that I want to talk to you about are, number one, we could change from an electric utility and become what I began to call an infotricity utility. We could completely change the dynamic between electric customers and electric utility, and we could offer competitive cable television on that network. Immediately, those 5 lay people, they're not like you guys, they're just regular salt-of-the-earth people, who never really had that big of an interest in infotricity, but that idea about competitive cable TV suited them just fine. And they gave me permission to go hire a consultant to answer the number one question we had at that time was, could you mix cable TV and electric telemetry on one network? I mean, would I Love Lucy conflict with kilowatt hour readings and all that? So I had no idea. And they gave me some money, and we went and found a consultant, which is pretty easy to do. Wave a little money around. It's like fishing. They come out. And the one that bit and the one that we set the hook on turned out to be fairly competent in broadband networks, but more than anything, they were a cable TV operative. So I got a report about that thick, and that much of it said, yeah, here's what it would probably cost. It would probably work. Here's how the cash flow would work. And the rest, the other 3/4 of it were, but if a city owned a cable system, dogs would start sleeping with cats, the earth would spin improperly on its axis, all this evil stuff would happen. To which my board, when they read the report or when I summarized it for them, said, oh, the hell with that, let's do it anyway. So we went to the city council and asked for a franchise to get in the cable business, and as you might imagine, the cable operator discovered where Glasgow was and started coming to town and coming to city council meetings, and the net effect of that process was that the city council, which is 12 people, the Glasgow Common Council, 12 people on a 7-5 vote, and this municipal ordinance required 2 readings before we could have a franchise. So on the first reading, it just barely passed on a 7-5 vote. Classic concerns, dogs sleeping with cats and all that sort of stuff. But in the intervening 2 weeks before the next city council meeting, the cable operator turned up the heat. They came to town and met at the Rotary Club and churches and civic functions, and told everybody that we were basically too stupid to operate any such network as this, and why don't you leave this to the professionals. So 2 weeks later, on a 12-0 vote, I was told to go forth and build a broadband network. And the underlying talk was, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't really believe in Billy Ray, but those bastards aren't going to come in here and say that. So, I went back. Well, they're gone now. It was Telescripts Cable at the time, which ultimately got scarfed up by Comcast, and then ultimately they left Glasgow. I'll tell you about that. I went back to my team at the Glasgow Electric Plant Board and did something that I probably should have done earlier on in this process. I asked them if anybody had any idea how to build a broadband network. Much to my chagrin, nobody did, including me. I had just kind of gotten caught up in the principle of the thing. And now that the city had told us we should do this, I thought it important that we figure out how to do that. So we couldn't think of anything, but perhaps we decided to go over to the cable operator's office and sit in the parking lot with newspaper with little holes cut out in it, And we watched them come and go to see if there were any genetically superior beings coming in and out of there, and they appeared to be just like us. They drove pickup trucks and drank beer. And so we thought, hell, how hard can it be? So we ordered us up a bunch of cable and a bunch of electronics and started off the process of becoming a cable operator. Now, I think I really want to spend some time today talking about how I think infotricity makes a big difference in the world, but the underlying foundation is this is how we got there. And I was here most of the day yesterday and heard throughout my career a lot of different theories on how these networks should be built and who should own them and what the governance should be and all that. I don't know what's right. I can tell you what's worked in Glasgow, and this process has worked quite well. Now, we made a couple of lucky decisions since from day one, since we intended this broadband plant mainly to support our electric operation and to provide infotricity to replace electricity. We counted it as electric plant from day one. So it really wasn't any different than the board making the decision to go build a new substation. It's just electric plant. So we skipped over the voting and all that kind of stuff. It was just something we determined we needed in order to continue to provide a flow of electrons to the community. We built it. We started hooking up the cable TV head end to it and crafted an accounting process whereby the cable TV function paid rent on the bandwidth that they used and paid it to the electric division. And that's turned out to be something that's worked well as we stacked on all these other services over the years. Now, again, somebody with the limited background and expertise, how did we become famous and how did we get to where we are now? Well, we really owe it all to the cable operator because as we started building this network, we ordered, again, in 1988, there was no fiber. It was all coaxial cable in those days, but we did build an unusual coaxial cable system. It's a Euro-split system because we knew that we were going to do bidirectional stuff. And so those of you from Europe, we have your architecture to thank for our success. But as we built it, street by street, the cable operator would follow us down that street and lower the rates for cable TV from $20 a month to $5 a month. And I had a tendency to tell people about that, and every opportunity I got, I used the bully pulpit to say what the cable operator was doing. We decided to do things like run full-page ads in the newspapers in neighboring communities where the rates were still high and say, hey, how come you can't get it for $5? And some of those cities were like Chattanooga, Tennessee, and some really large Knoxville. And so that began to have an impact. And we started getting some press. We were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and we started getting all kinds of news coverage. And that news coverage came from the $5 war. And the news coverage brought other technologies to us that we would have never found on our own. About 1990, when we were just getting going good. And also when, at the same time, we were involved in a lot of litigation, big federal lawsuit, state lawsuit. We were arguing about who owned the wire in the homes. Turns out the cable operators took the position that they owned the coaxial cable in everybody's house, and that if we wanted to use it, we had to buy it from them or something like that. And believe it or not, a full-blown jury trial ensued on that, and the jury in Glasgow, Kentucky, believe it or not, said that we own that damn wire and we'll do what we want with it. So we won that one. And the federal lawsuit, thanks to Nick Miller was in here somewhere, but one of his former partners, Randy Young, defended us on that. Again, we have the cable operator to thank. They sued us for damages. And when they did that, we had an insurance policy that we didn't even know about, but it was called Directors and Officers Liability Insurance. And when they tried to get damages out of us, it kicked that policy in, and we got very good legal representation. And it's the only time I've ever been in a federal courtroom, but I remember to this day going in there, and this was 1989. Went in there, and there were Burt Braverman and a bunch of Washington attorneys representing Telescripts, and Randy Young was representing us, and the judge came in and sat down and flipped through the papers and looked out over his spectacles at Burt Braverman and said, I've read your briefs, and it looks like you bastards just do not want competition in Glasgow. And so I looked at Randy and I said, I assume that's good. He said, yeah, that's good. So he said, if you don't come up with something better than this, you're not going to have any fun in my courtroom. And it turned out they didn't have any fun in there. And within 6 or 8 months, we were without litigation, so we were actually in the business. I tell you all that just to kind of bring you to the point that as we went down street by street in Glasgow, and the $5 stuff was the response, other technology vendors called us after they saw these newspaper reports and said, if you've got a broadband network, we've got this technology we've been wanting to play with in a city. Would you be interested, for example, the first company, long since gone now, but a company called First Pacific Networks, called us up and said, would you like to be in the phone business? We've got technology that you could put on your network that will put you in the phone business. And I said, why not? So I went back to that 5-person board and said, how do you guys feel about being in the phone business? And they said, can we do that? And I said, well, these guys said they'll send us some boxes that will make it do that. And I say we just hook them up and see what happens. And we did, and it worked. We called each other, come here, Watson, I need you. And so we sold some phone service to the local schools and played around with it some. It was more than anything just a novelty. Although I remember there was a speechwriter from back before AT&T bought it out, Bell South, obviously in our area, and they thought our little project was cute. And they sent a speechwriter down to write a speech for the CEO of Bell South at the time. I guess he was trying to be visionary and talk to this National Telephone Association meeting about what could happen. And so he told about the Glasgow story. And another you're going to notice a Forrest Gump theme to this. Another fateful thing was that in that audience were some guys from a company called MCI Metro. Again, doesn't exist anymore. But they heard about it and then called me up and said, could we come to Glasgow? We want to see what's going on down there. I said, sure, come on. And that started a long relationship that lasted 2 or 3 years where that they basically had an apartment in Glasgow. They were there all the time. One of the big things to do in Glasgow was to go out and look at the MCI jet at the airport because we don't see a lot of those around Glasgow. And in that process, we had learned then and discovered these neat cards made by IBM at the time that you could put in the early PCs, and we just saw them in a catalog, and it looked like it went in a PC, and it had an F connector out the back of it So we figured there's got to be a way to hook up cable to this thing and make computers talk to each other. And I had a guy that was kind of a propeller head at the time and said, why don't you get us a couple of those and see what happens? And he got them, and I didn't see him for 2 or 3 months. And he came back and said, hey, we got them talking to each other, and by God, they talk fast. And it was 2 megabits per second. We didn't know what a megabit was, but we assumed that was fast. And there wasn't anything real. There was no internet. This was 1991, 92. But we used that to do a really neat demonstration. This is very historical. One of the only things we could find to talk to was that the schools had this big file server, and it had like a CD version of the Encyclopedia Britannica on there. And we could show how you could put PCs anywhere in town and access the Encyclopedia Britannica. Made a nice demo. Well, when we were showing that to the MCI Metro people one day, one of them went to the phone and called, I guess, a fella who I know now but didn't know at the time, Vinton Cerf, and said, hey, you need to have lunch with this guy in Glasgow, and we need to see about hooking the internet up to their network down there. And sure enough, he called me and wanted to know if I wanted to fly to Tyson's or Reston and have lunch with him, and I didn't want to because I'd never heard of him. And the MCI guy kept saying, no, really, you need to do this. I swear. And so I did, and we had lunch, and I noticed that he must have been somebody because none of the MCI people would look him directly in the eye. They spoke in hushed tones when he was in the room, and I thought, well, this guy must be somebody. And he says, I've heard about your network and what you're doing. Would you like us to hook the internet up to it? And I thought, why not? So by the time I got back, there were some trucks at our office, and they were running a T1 which in Glasgow in 1994 wasn't easy to get a T1 anywhere in Glasgow, Kentucky, let me tell you. But they did it somehow. And we started hooking up the same computers that were getting the Encyclopedia Britannica suddenly could get the internet. And I went back to my board and said, hey, we've got another thing here, internet service. Do you want to do that? And by now there's like, whatever you say. And what do you think we ought to charge for it? And I don't know, somebody jumped up and said, how about $19.95 a month? We didn't have any idea what to charge for. So, and luckily at the time, the T1 wasn't costing us anything because Vinton Cerf thought it was just funny to do, I guess. And so that's how we got into all these businesses. And my point is we owe it to the cable operator for every bit of this stuff. But meanwhile, while we're doing all these other businesses and getting the experience at having all these other products, meanwhile, we were still an electric utility that wanted to do infotricity. Once we learned once cable modems were invented and we knew how to get Ethernet at every electric meter that we had, we redoubled our efforts to find electric meters that had an Ethernet interface that we could assign an IP address to. And we searched high and low through the 90s and finally found this company up in New England called Munet. munet.com. And they, amazingly, were making a meter, sure enough, with an RJ45 that we could talk to. And we started our long process of incorporating those meters, helping them develop them, throwing them away because they quit working right, starting all over again, going back to them and telling them what it needs to do, what it's going to be like for this meter that hangs on the side of a house and is subjected to every kind of evil that the weather can throw at it, how hard it's got to be to make that work. And over a number of years, they accomplished that. And now today, there are a number of meter manufacturers that will do that. But the story far from ends there. How am I doing on time? I have no idea. Okay, well, let me try to speed up some. And when you got an accent like this, that is hard as hell to do. I've heard a lot of people now, we started calling it infotricity. Now everybody likes to say smart grid, and I don't really know what the difference is. But here's the way I think about infotricity. Infotricity is to electricity as inorganic is to organic. Electric power, and let me drill down just a little bit here in the time I've got left. I think everybody has probably seen a graphic that shows the daily load shape, and it's basically a sine wave. And the interesting thing is that if you're looking at that graphic for your house, which is a sine wave, there's fractal geometry involved here. That the wave for your house, the daily load shape for your house, oddly is the same as the daily load shape for your street, and for the city, and for all the cities served by that electric utility, which I think is really odd, because that load shape is actually determined, and this has been the case for the last 100 years. The load shape is determined by a bunch of really stupid devices in your house called thermostats. It's thermostat in your refrigerator, thermostat on your wall, thermostat in the electric water heater. Thermostats that are $4 or $5 are making all of the decisions about how many nuclear plants we build, how many coal-fired plants, all by the stupidest device in the house, a thermostat. And strangely, you would think just by empirical analysis that all these millions of different thermostats would not agree to run at the same time and create that sine wave, that there would be this confusion or chaos created. But they don't. They all, it has something to do with our circadian rhythms and the temperature and all that, but it creates this sine wave. What infotricity can do, and what we can do once we have broadband and IP-based thermostats and IP-based water heaters and IP-based appliances, is that we can, for the first time in the history of electric power, create the load shape that we want based upon the generation assets that we would like to run. One of the things that hasn't been said in this discussion in the last 24 hours, I did see somebody put a slide up here about the portfolio, about half of our energy is made by coal, so much of a percent by hydro, so much of a percent by nuclear. Well, a utility like the one we buy from in Kentucky, the Tennessee Valley Authority, has all of those assets every day to decide when they're going to run them. But they have to make those decisions based upon the orders given by the thermostats. And so the most efficient, hydro is by far the greenest asset that we have. But they are forced to use hydro to clip the top off of the sine wave. Instead of running it in a base load fashion, it is squandered because of the orders given by the stupid thermostat. So we waste the hydro that way. We also waste the efficiency of even the coal-fired plants. Coal-fired plants like to create an output that is a rectangle. But we force them, because of the sine wave shape that we're trying to satisfy, to operate at much less than their high efficiency by having to gear them down and cycle them down to track the sine wave. If the utilities could treat all these millions of devices with an IP address, and if, and this is the biggest if somebody wrote the right piece of software to control each one of those loads just like this piece of software is doing for all the trillions of cells in my body, then we would have an organic electric system that would not be an electric system. It would be an infotricity system. And what I have found in our experience in Glasgow is that now we can build broadband. There are a few manufacturers making IP addressable thermostats and water heater switches, and the major appliance manufacturers are talking about doing the same thing for the major appliances. But the thing I cannot find, and anybody, either I'm completely blind and can't find it, or I'm correct in my assumption that it doesn't exist, is the piece of software. Somebody has got to write the piece of software that goes between those that are burning coal and those that are consuming heat in their home and manage the loads to meet the generation capacity. we discovered this is very timely, just a couple of months ago, we started installing our first IP-based thermostats in a project with TVA and EPRI. And as we started learning how to integrate the thermostats into the smart meters that we already had, TVA looks at us and says, okay, now you can start controlling the thermostats. And I said, what are we going to talk to them about? We don't know when your generation assets are such that you need to vary the temperature. You've got to do that. To which the largest public utility on the planet looked back at me and said, how? I said, we're in trouble if you're asking me. And it turns out that we are in trouble. You know, I finally had to go back to that phone call. I called Vent and Surf again and said, Mr. Surf, here's the new problem. You're with a company now that writes software. We really need a piece of software written. Will you write that? And we're talking. You know, I can say, you know, I had to sign an NDA immediately, so I can't say a lot. But we are, Google and TVA and the Glasgow Electric Plant Board are trying to get this piece of software written. Yeah, you should be afraid. But at the end of the day, you know, I really think that an electric system can have a metabolism, that it can operate as an organism instead of this inanimate object. That we have the technology, we have the bandwidth. Jim Salter put a great slide up here, and this is what I've been trying to convince TVA of. About a year ago, I went to a TVA conference where they gave all the distributors their game plan on what they were going to do over the next several years to meet the demand for electric power. It included a number of new nuclear units. They felt like they needed about $18 billion worth of new nuclear units. And I just quickly did the math on what it would cost to build fiber to the home to all the 9 million homes that they serve. And the answer is that it would be cheaper to build broadband than it would to build the nuclear units. And I think that the broadband network, if all this stuff works, if somebody can write that piece of software, would have a greater generating capacity than the nuclear units. Now, I'm trying to convince TVA of that. The largest electric utility in North America, the one that just filled the Clinch River with 1 billion cubic yards of coal fly ash, and run by generally a lot of people that like to build new generating capacity. It is a struggle, and I will continue to struggle. But some of you smart people need to write some software. Thank you.
Andy and Bill, come on up. I think we're going to hear from Bill St. Arnaud next. Bill St. Arnaud has been a leader in optical networking. He's been on the leading edge of fiber optic research and on fiber optic network research, and he's from a northern country, so slightly more progressive than we are, but we're catching up fast. Recently, Bill has thrown his considerable intellectual capacities behind the issue of green broadband. And so to continue on the theme of infotricity, Bill St. Arnaud.
Thanks, Dave. Well, unlike Billy, Microsoft ate my brain, and I'm going to have to use slides and PowerPoint here for my presentation. But my talks really follow on to what Tom Friedman was saying yesterday, and is that, we do face a major challenge with climate change, but I think there is a significant business opportunity, particularly here for the United States, to really show world leadership here, and I think it will be the next major innovation cycle for a whole new cycle of wealth and so forth. You all have heard about the climate change challenge. I'd like to point out to a few blogs and websites here that you think you should take a look at it. One is by the new National Science Advisor, John Holdren. Before he became National Science Advisor, put up a video which really summarizes, I think, the challenge we face in just 5 minutes, and really, puts to rest all the counter debates we're having about this issue. And I really encourage you to look at that. This new administration, I think, is just really fantastic. They really have some top-notch people. The other one, of course, is Stephen Chu, who's heading up the Department of Energy. He's got something out there called Wake Up America. Again, something that was done before he became head of the DOE. But again, it summarizes the challenge we face. Andy Revkin here, he's got the world's second best blog, in my opinion. I'll tell you the first in a few minutes, but you should really follow that because he really covers these issues, I think, in a very dispassionate way. And just yesterday, I think we actually put up one on the challenge of tipping points. There's a number of research papers out there with a lot of concern that we're approaching a tipping point, that there's going to be some major climatic disruption. In fact, that's what John Holdren uses. He said this is not about global warming or about climate change. It's global climatic disruption is what he calls it. And this concern is that we may reach a tipping point, either major drought in the southwest or disappearing ice and so forth. And this will really then galvanize politicians and the public to do something. And you really want to be ready for that. And then again, another more recent study is just the MIT has come out with a report really looking at the probability analysis of all the various climate models. And their conclusion is that we've really been underestimating the data, as Tom Friedman estimate said yesterday, and that we're aiming for a 5.1 median temperature increase. And as Tom mentioned, the difference between global ice age and today's climate is 6 degrees. And if we get up to 5.1, we're in very, very serious trouble. Our challenge is that we, by the Kyoto Agreement, which is, of course, based on some older models, and now the upcoming Copenhagen Summit in this December, is we got to reduce our carbon footprint by 80% by 2050. This is the commitment we have currently. And that means we currently, on average, produce about 26 tons in North America. It varies from district to district, but that's a nominal number. We've got to get down to 2 tons of CO2 per person by 2050. That's not going to be easy to do. That's going to mean major changes in our lifestyle and everything we do, in the way we drive, the way we heat our homes, and so forth. And it's really going to change our energy mix. And that's what we've got to address. The current, you saw the stats, coal is about 40% of the CO2 emissions and so forth. We've got to dramatically change that somehow if we're going to reduce this carbon footprint and avoid those dire consequences. But that's the bad news. As I mentioned, I think this is a huge opportunity, particularly for the United States. And what the opportunity is first is in the new energy markets as well as the carbon markets. Reducing carbon is a business opportunity. There's estimated by 2050 it's going to be $500 billion in carbon markets. This is in trading of permits and so forth and offsets as we try to bring in cap and trade and carbon taxes and so forth. This will be an opportunity not only for the energy industry, but for our industry as well. Because any application that can reduce either the production of energy that results in carbon or reduces carbon directly is eligible for earning revenue from permit trading and so on and so forth. There'll be a carbon market expected already is about $92 billion worldwide, and that's really going to grow significantly, particularly if Congress passes Obama's proposed cap and trade of $645 billion. Now, a lot of that money is going to flow back into the revenues for the government, which will be desperately needed. But a good percentage of that will be used for auctioning permits. And again, as I mentioned, if you have solutions for your energy company that either avoids that production of power, then they will pay you rather than giving the money to the government. And this is a revenue opportunity for broadband networks and so forth. But to be eligible for these revenues, you have to go through a process of certification and auditing to demonstrate truly that you have come up with a solution for reducing CO2. Now, I must stress, it's not an energy issue. It's not the energy is a problem, it's a type of energy. It's the challenge we face. And so trying to develop tools and applications that change the energy mix and reduce CO2 production is where you make the money. And you have to go through this very arduous process called ISO 14064, there's a couple other standards out there, which really truly verify that you're reducing your emissions. Now, you hear a lot of claims from vendors, oh, we're more energy efficient, or we're going to do this and that and so forth. None of that will stand up. It's all bogus. And if you don't learn how to do this right now, you won't have this significant business opportunity. Now, as you know, governments are wrestling with the challenge. Generally, it's mostly recognized that CO2 and climate change is the challenge facing this planet. and governments are wrestling with the different policy approaches. Economists argue, of course, that carbon taxes is the best solution worldwide, but it is so difficult to implement, particularly in today's financial economy. You know, the word tax is just simply impossible these days. So the other approach, of course, is cap and trade. Cap and trade is really a hidden tax. You know, you don't say the word tax, but it is a method of increasing the cost of power, principally coal-fired power, and bearing that cost in your electric bill, to encourage energy companies to switch to other sources of power and really try to minimize any type of power that's produced from fossil fuel. So it addresses the supply side of the problem. The other thing that's coming is governments are starting to mandate carbon neutrality. There is a really concern now that we can't wait for the effects of cap and trade to come into place, that we must move much quicker. So we've got governments like New Zealand, British Columbia, Canada, Sweden, and so forth that are implementing, mandating carbon neutrality first on the public sector and then gradually into the public sector through private sector through RFPs and so forth. This is causing major dislocation for universities and hospitals and so forth, and it's going to be very serious. Already in the UK, if you're responding to an RFP from the government to provide broadband services or anything like that, you must do what's called shadow carbon cost accounting. And you must show that your solution produces less carbon than your competitors. And this is going to be a major evaluation in terms of responding to RFPs. Again, in UK, in Holland, and Britain, in Sweden, institutions for funding for research and so forth is also being evaluated in terms of the carbon cost. And in the UK, universities are being told their funding for universities will be totally dependent on their carbon footprint. So there's a lot of things like this, but we believe there's another approach, and this is where broadband networks really play an important role. And that's carbon rewards rather than carbon taxes, something I call G-commerce instead of e-commerce. Although economists agree carbon taxes are the best neutral solution, they're going to be very difficult to implement. And the other problem with taxes is it penalizes the consumer. They get no direct reward for good behavior. And we know from all the loyalty programs with airlines, hotels, and so forth that rewarding consumers really encourages appropriate change of behavior. And so we're suggesting rather than penalizing consumers or businesses for that matter with taxes, can we not find ways to reward them for adopting practices that reduce their carbon footprint? And we think virtualized services, our services delivered over broadband networks, is the way to do this. From cell phone to broadband to free or movies and anything like that we can deliver over broadband networks is a way we can reward consumers, provide these for zero or free in exchange for the consumer reducing their footprint in the way they travel or in their transportation and so on and so forth. And why we want to do this is there are several studies that come out there. Here's one that came from the European Commission Joint Research Institute that shows that virtualization or dematerialization of goods can allow us to achieve at least about a 20% reduction in CO2 footprint by consumers and businesses as well. But it would be for a net effect of 15% because to do this, all this virtualization would result in increased power consumption or CO2 emissions by networks. But I think we have a solution for that. And so if we can do this, this is probably the most important tool we have for reducing our footprint. There's nothing out there in our arsenal that really could have this dramatic impact. And this is why open broadband networks are going to be so important and why I argue virtualization and dematerialization may be the next big killer application for the Internet. Now, the U.S., which country is the world leader in virtualization? It's the United States. Hollywood produces all the content. If we delivered that content over our networks, we wouldn't have the impact of shipping CDs and all that other material across the network. Silicon Valley, of course, is king for the applications in terms of clouds and virtualization. We put that cloud infrastructure we call zero carbon data centers. We can deliver all these services over the Internet, all the new tools and applications, which is already starting to happen. We're seeing from Google Docs and so forth that so many applications are moving to the cloud. Let's make sure that cloud infrastructure is based at zero carbon sites. We have a fantastic university system for innovation, and many universities now are really looking at these issues of how we move to a zero carbon society. And of course, an Internet culture here in the United States of early adoption, acceptance of new changes and so forth. And a good example of that is MIT's Sixth Sense. I don't know if you've seen that video on TED, 5 minutes. That's a great example of this type of virtualization, replacing your wristwatch, replacing your cell phone with virtual images on your hand and so forth, so you can communicate with the rest of the world. Why we want to do this is consumers are responsible for about 60% of all CO2 emissions, about 35% directly and 25% indirectly. If we can get consumers to really reduce their footprint, that can make a dramatic reduction in our CO2 emissions. Another good example is in Birmingham, UK. School buses are putting on free Wi-Fi in the school buses to encourage students, rather than being driven to school, to take the buses. They can use this free Wi-Fi to play games, maybe do their homework, and things like that. And this is an example of how we can encourage public transportation. In San Francisco now, there's a private company that set up these special buses for businessmen to commute from Mariana County and so forth, where they have Wi-Fi and femtocells, and so you can have your office on wheels. And rather than driving your car into the city, you can take these buses, you have your own seat and all these proper tools. This is the type of business models there, I think, are possible now, and we start thinking in this direction of moving towards a zero-carbon society. We have a project, as many of you have heard about, in Ottawa, where we're also trying to deliver broadband, free fiber to the home, in exchange for the consumer paying a little extra premium on their energy bill. Now, as you know, we've deployed the fiber. We've run into a small problem that there's no retail ISPs left in Canada. We're still wrestling with that. But this is another model that we think represents this type of thinking. Rather than trying to get consumers to pay for the broadband, trying to find a business model through triple play and so forth, we are working with our energy resale companies, ESCOs are called, to bundle the cost of the fiber and the internet in with the energy bill. Now, this is a business model that's been around for a decade with the energy resale market. Many of these companies you've probably knocked on your door already. Many of them are fly-by-night, unfortunately, and where they will try to lock you into a 5-year or 3-year deal on your energy at a fixed price, and for that they'll throw in free home renovations, a hot water tank, or some even offer long-distance minutes and so on and so forth. And what we're doing is working with these ESCOs to bundle in broadband as well, because we think this will be a powerful incentive then for consumers to use these virtualized products and reduce their energy consumption. In fact, they're encouraged to reduce their energy consumption with no penalty in terms of their broadband services and these virtualized products. And more importantly, we believe it's a new business model that will provide a guaranteed revenue stream for the carrier or service provider. Rather than being dependent on triple play and all the, the challenges of that with all the new over-the-top services from Google and Skype and so forth, here is a revenue stream based on the customer's energy consumption and reduction or CO2 reduction. And so now you've got something that's much more certain. Customers may cancel their cable, they may cancel their internet, but they can't cancel their energy. And the other thing is the utility does all the billing and collection on your behalf. And the utility, believe me, has a much bigger stick in terms of collection than any small ISP. But we first must clean up our own act. The internet already, as you may have heard, the ICT industry produces 2 to 3% of greenhouse gas emissions. Future forecasts in terms of the growth of the internet estimates that will consume about 8 to 9% of electricity, and just the broadband routers alone may consume 5% of electricity. We simply cannot allow that to happen. The internet could be one of the biggest producers of greenhouse gas emissions on the current trajectories. We've got to reverse that. So we believe a zero carbon strategy is essential, not carbon neutrality, but zero carbon, and we believe we're the industry that can do that. And with zero carbon strategy, regardless of the growth of the industry, regardless of how much equipment and services we provide, anything times zero is always zero. And we believe that wind and solar power will be the primary vehicles for achieving a zero carbon. But disconnect it from the electrical grid. You want to be disconnected from these big electrical utilities because as cap and trade comes online, yes, it's going to push up the price of dirty power, but as a consequent, industry will move to clean power and push up its price as well. So the more you can disconnect from the electrical grid and get your own energy sources, the better off you'll be with long-term certainty price in your power and clean power especially. Now I want to just talk a second about falsehood of energy efficiency. You're hearing a lot about vendors, we're more energy efficient and so forth. Please look up 2 famous economists, Gazoon-Brooks. It's called the Gazoon-Brooks postulate, and there's lots of demonstrations that energy efficiency paradoxically increases energy consumption. And this was discovered with the CAFE laws that were passed by Congress in 1973. There's many more examples of this through history. I won't go through the details here, but energy efficiency is the wrong approach. We've got to change our energy mix to much more cleaner power. And we have some examples already of this is happening. Companies like Google and Microsoft are building data centers that use mostly hydropower, wind power, and so forth. There's a company called Ecotricity in the UK that will build a windmill at its cost at your data center or at your business and provide you with cheap, clean power under long-term contracts. Companies like this are about to get established in the United States, and so there's lots of opportunities to buy this type of clean power with guaranteed price over the next decade and so forth. Another interesting project is in the Nordic countries. What they're doing, all the universities are moving their high-performance computers to Iceland. And because the government is saying, researchers, you have to measure your carbon footprint in terms of what type of computing power you want to buy. So you can buy a small computer, which consumes a lot of electricity and produces carbon in Denmark, or you can buy a much bigger computer located in Iceland, which uses renewable energy. We could do that because of high-speed optical networks. Now, again, as I mentioned, we don't need those big, gigantic windmills. One of the big problems we have with renewable energy is all the protests and complaints about those huge megawatt windmills we see out there. And again, this is a problem I have with the megawatt mindset of the utilities. For our industry, there's much smaller windmills which you can put on your roof and so forth. They're called vertical axis turbines. They can produce 50 to 100 kilowatts of power. And they're ideal for powering routers, servers, computers, and everything that we use in our industry. And so we have a project in Canada because we're going to use these types of windmills, but the problem we have is they're not reliable. The wind doesn't blow all the time. So what we're doing is building a new type of network. We're funding this project using only renewable energy sources, no batteries, no diesel backup, no connection to the electrical grid, but using the network, the inherent reliability and restorability of the internet to reroute traffic to various nodes depending on the availability of power. And this is how we can use the internet as an alternative to electrical transmission lines. And given the importance of the internet for the future virtualization and so forth, we think this is a new type of architecture that really will help us move away from this currently fossil fuel fiesta we have in today's society. So my last slide is, this is, I think, a very important area. There's huge business opportunities in the whole area of permits and carbon offsets. There's a couple, this is a nonprofit institute, Greenhouse Gas Management Institute, which provides training to IT and networking professionals on how to take advantage of this marketplace. It's billions of dollars. And so if you have an application or either virtualization or you want to do smart grids and smart energy, learn how to capture that revenue, not only from the energy reduction, but also from the carbon offset reduction through the standards that are out there, and learn about this process. So here's my opinion, the world's best blogs. There's a lot more information on this. I encourage you, and please send me an email if you have any further questions. I think this is the greatest challenge we face, but the greatest opportunity as well. And I think the United States is the best positioned country in this regard. Thank you.
Go ahead, Andy. Oh, yeah. Oh, geez. No, sorry. You may speak, but no voice.
Yeah, this looks like juggling.
Yeah, you got to turn it on there, and excuse me. Yes.
Yeah. Good. Are you all plugged in? It's amazing watching the real-time discussion of all this. I wrote down a couple of the it's kind of like the fire hose I face on my blog every hour. It's just right there, just coming and coming and coming. But there's some good questions there, and then obviously you'll have questions too. I want to ask a couple of things. A lot of what I heard at lunch about the sort of community-generated broadband universe versus the status quo relates to inertia and the power of the status quo, and it reminds me so much of what I've been writing about lately in terms of, in Washington, the energy arena, the two related arenas you're talking about in terms of wired stuff that's carried in wires or fibers. There's now 4,000 lobbyists registered in Washington around climate and energy. The last couple of years has been an explosion in that. I wrote about this recently on the blog. The Center for Public Integrity did a fascinating in-depth report on this, and that means there's 4 times as many lobbyists on either representing coal or representing windmills and solar panels than there are congressmen and women, which is kind of scary. So, but the bottom line is there's a lot of inertia in the way we do things, and you seem to have figured out a way at that granular scale to break through a little bit. Some of the things that Bill's talking about probably require a bigger scale breakthrough, and I wanted each of you to talk about the inertia and what you see as prospects for change. And by the way, on the global scale, this is all there as well in terms of the climate treaty and how that would add, credits that you might get for broadband under the carbon value of doing something that way instead of moving people around. So what's the deal? Are there bigger lessons from what happened in Glasgow that could replicate widely?
I don't know why not. There are something like 15,000 cities and towns across North America, and I don't know why any of them couldn't do what we've done. It helps a lot to be one of the 2,000 that already operate an electric utility. But Glasgow didn't always operate its own electric utility. In fact, in 1961, the people voted to throw out the incumbent electric provider and start its own. So that mechanism is still there. It can still be done. I think the single keystone, though, that could move more toward infotricity would just be a very large carbon tax and something that makes it every utility look at their coal-fired plants and say, I don't think I can keep running these things. That's going to cause all this other innovation. So that really is a keystone element, I believe.
Just before we move to Bill, do you get the sense, but there is a multiple logic, I assume, for doing some of this too. If you set aside the carbon problem, suppose that 10%, the IPCC report says they're confident, 90% confidence that most of the warming since 1950 is human generated. Suppose the 10% is right.
Hey, talk to the people in eastern Tennessee right now that just had the Clinch River filled with coal ash.
Right.
They don't care whether it causes global warming or not. They just don't want to drink it.
I was just at a meeting in Nashville, North Carolina, with a coal miner telling some pretty horrible tales about what's going on, too. So, Bill, on that scale.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very valid point. The one thing I try and emphasize, even if you're a complete denier and don't believe in any of this climate change, reducing your energy consumption is still a good news story. It reduces your costs. So anything you do in that area is going to be a benefit for you and your business and so forth. But I think the Internet community now faces our biggest challenge ever. We thought the battle with the telcos and cable cos was a big challenge. Battling the energy industry is going to be bigger. This whole oxymoron of clean coal is a classic example of that. And I think the energy industry is going to, they're trying to present themselves as our friends, but they're not. They're basically conflicted. They make their money by producing dirty energy. And, they're talking all the green talk and so forth. But fundamentally, they got to responsible to shareholders, and they got to produce bigger profits from dirty fuel. So we got to find solutions, I think, not in opposition to them, because they're going to be dragging their feet in terms of finding solutions. And I think our community, which is used to rapid change and innovative solutions, can really provide a powerful leadership role to the rest of the society.
Now, another question I have, and this came up at another meeting that I was at that David held last summer, is at the global scale. Most of the discussion here, at least in the part I got to see this today, I was over at a climate summit at the National Academies of Science yesterday. What are the possibilities in places that are just beginning to build out their system that are far greater than here, rural in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, elsewhere? Can you see, and by the way, that's also where 97% of the growth in emissions of greenhouse gases is going to come in developing countries. Well, right, they haven't done it wrong yet. So how much righter can we get by focusing developing models there before there's the entrenched counter-bureaucracy?
Oh, I think there's some great opportunities there in working with some of the traditional ways of doing things in terms of they already use a lot of solar ovens and so on and so forth, and is to try to encourage that type of innovation there. In India, they're already looking at solar-powered cell phones, wind-powered cell phone towers, and so on and so forth. And there's one study that says it's going to have about 800,000 of them, because they realize they simply don't have the resources to emulate the wrong approach we have done in the past. And I think they really could be doing some really innovative things there. We got to encourage that.
Any thoughts from your end on that?
No, I agree. I think the biggest luxury they have is not having done it wrong. You got a clean sheet of paper to work with. You don't have these legacy problems and all these contractors that want to build more coal plants and more nuclear reactor vessels. If you don't have that, you've got a really much smoother route to sail.
By the way, that gets back to something, I think it's David Owen I was talking at lunch. David Owen, right? Is that, you're out there? Anyway, and this probably, I guarantee this relates to what Tom Friedman might have been talking about yesterday, even though it wasn't here, which is the competitiveness issue. How as David said at lunch, $7 billion of the stimulus package of many tens of billions is for fiber and that kind of thing, compared to building stuff out of concrete. as the developing countries are vaulting into mobility and wireless stuff, are we really setting ourselves up for even more so than you might have said already for losing the race of the 21st century?
I don't think so. I think there is a window of opportunity here, but if we don't take advantage of that window, yes, we'll become North America's second or third world country. But I think $7 billion for broadband, but if the cap and trade goes through, there's $645 billion. That's the market you want to target. Forget it, $7 billion broadband is going to be peanuts in comparison. And I think we have a solution that addresses $645 billion just in the United States alone, trillions of dollars worldwide. That's the opportunity.
Yeah, maybe I'll give you a quick data dump from the climate summit yesterday, which was, this is a congressionally mandated study, the National Academies, with 4 prongs. What do we still need to learn in the science? What do we need to learn about how to make science influence policy meaningfully, and several other things, which I blogged on this morning. But when you really push hard on this, and just today I think Waxman and others they came out with their draft bill. And the question remains, though, how this gets translated into an environmentally meaningful result. We may have a lot of cap and trading and not see emissions divert that much because of offsets and other wiggle room that you'll see. And for legislation to survive the congressional gauntlet, there'll have to be so much flexibility, many people anticipate, that it will actually not really do much, which is what happened in Europe initially. And now they're really grappling with sustaining a carbon market. And the same thing in California. It was one thing to have their legislation pass and get signed by the governor and make a lot of front-page stories. It is another now to actually write the rule book and set the sort of cost governors into the operation so that it can be actually work. And the New England, the RGGI process is the same thing. So there's a significant chance a lot of money will change hands, a lot of credits will change hands, but the climate system will just sort of be sitting up there still seeing billowing accumulations of greenhouse gases. This is not necessarily in your realms of expertise, but would you say that's possible? And by the way, start to get ready for questions from the audience, too.
Absolutely. I think those concerns, all the auctioning of permits are going to work and so forth. There's all sorts of details, and all the lobbyists are working that very hard. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, I think we're going to need another crisis. We're going to have to hit one of those tipping points before we really have meaningful solutions to address this problem.
Yeah, and again, everyone might look back at my story from Sunday's paper, which says the problem with these tipping points is they're putative. We know them, that we've had abrupt climate changes in the past that have been very disruptive, created a lot of sea level rise and a lot of climate change in short periods of time, but we have no clue whether the Amazon is going to turn to desert, whether when you actually look at the specifics, there's still high uncertainty. And this leads a lot of the climate scientists who have been working on this for a long time to just say, well, let's at least get ready with the toolkit so that if and when something hits hard, we'll be ready. And maybe we can start to take some questions. Should I point them out? Anyone out there? There were a couple here on the board. I might start with.
I have one.
Where are you?
I'm over here.
Okay, cool.
I'm Bice Wilson, and I'm an architect and urban designer. I prefer to say I'm a placemaker. And some of you may wonder why I'm here at this conference. And if you want to know why, I can give you two examples, what we've just heard here and my left ankle. As to my left ankle, I'm an architect. I make places. I've been working on building the new sphere nervous system into our cities since 1975. And one of the things that requires is that we make places where people can come together with a lot of devices and stay connected. And I tripped over one of your extension cords today. So we have not skillfully done that yet in this place, and that's a challenge. On the other hand, at the TED conference this year, I met a man who's making addressable duplex outlets and a protocol for putting an RFID chip in every plug so it'll tell what's plugged into every outlet and feed into the system that you were talking about, Bill. So one of the other reasons I'm here is because David and Chuck Sherwood and Rita Stull and a guy named Bruce Lincoln from Columbia University and Joe Plotkin and a bunch of other people in the room, and Norm Jackness. Hey, I can't forget Norm Jackness. We got together back in October and started a process called Designing the Invisible Public Way, but I have an announcement. It's now changed its name to Designing the Intelligent Public Way. And if you want to take a look at our collaborative website, the URL, and I'd love it if someone would put this on the blog, is dipw.meridiandesign, MERIDINDESIGN.com. And my contact information is there. If you want to participate and have ownership in the blog and be able to post things there, etc., just write me and you can participate.
How did they write you?
My contact information is on that site, ByceWilson@meridiandesign.com. And I would encourage you, we will be sending out notices of our meetings. People participate by phone, by WebEx. And basically what it's about is how these ideas
Not quite right. It's Meridian, MERIDIANDESIGN.
Right. What it's about is how these things we're talking about affect places, how they affect your cities, how I convince urban designers that these systems are worth talking about, because they're not talked about at all by urban designers. We need statistics. We need economic arguments. So this is exactly why I'm here, exactly what you guys have been talking about. It's amazing. So thank you.
Byce is the first casualty of any conference I've ever run, and I'm glad he's up and hobbling and is in good spirits.
Is there another question?
First, I apologize for the power cord, though. I did tape it down. Yes. But I think close related to a lot of power thing. This is where I think, having watched this, intelligent devices and stuff, I think we it's taken a century to not standardize an electric power plug. The wall warts are now being replaced by USB rapidly. I think we need to have a lot of simpler open interface devices so that we can start to have people implement smart interfaces. I'd love to buy an IP-based meter, IP-based, appliance connectors, but I don't want to have to wait for the ultimate protocol. So I think we need to encourage manufacturing stuff to have an open interface. The problem is you have a cross-cultural problem. People make appliances, don't understand these bits. And we need to get some way to encourage. We don't need, instead of big national plans, I'd like to see a lot of smaller efforts, such as power, like the wall warts. If we had a standard chip to do energy management, which we might get with USB, we'd go a long way. So there are a lot of modest things. The problem is we don't have an incentive system to encourage adding 2 pennies to a wall wart, even if it solves the problem. So I don't have any simple solutions, but I think some cross-cultural understandings go a long way. And the other thing that was not mentioned, for example, instead of shutting off your air conditioning, we have a lot of Middle East architecture that's very energy efficient in terms of using natural cooling. And we also need to encourage more of that.
Can I just mention one other thing? In listening to your discussions, Billy and Bill, about what you're doing, creating these feeds of information back from our houses over the nervous system that we're putting together, it struck me that what you're making possible is mindfulness. What you're making possible is that we can actually have a real-time feedback loop about our carbon footprints and our impacts. But what we're lacking are the cultural processes by which we can experience that mindfulness.
One thing along those lines, I wanted to, maybe you could riff on both of these things, is the other, along with the inertia problem, there's the stovepiping of ideas and communities. Does either of you feel you've adequately connected your stories? I think this is a simpler answer for you than Billy. With the environmental community, the success in Glasgow, I would assume, is not widely perceived as an environmental success. But it is in ways, isn't it?
Well, yes, but that there's not even a movement in Glasgow for that, so that's not an issue.
That's actually very informative, because again, if you can have the success without having the old-fashioned environmental fight, so much the better, right?
Well, what we found, and we've done. If I had more time, we could have talked more about the particulars of it, but we have determined that when you put in advanced metering and make it where that people can go to a website or go to a channel on their TV and see a dashboard feedback of exactly what their energy consumption has been, that they don't care. And that's why we're that much farther down the road in believing that we've got to step in and manage these loads for people, because people, even when they've got the feedback and they've got the information, they're not like you guys. These are just people that live in a small town in south central Kentucky, and they don't want to know what a kilowatt hour is, and they don't particularly even want to see a display of how many kilowatt hours they've used on their TV set. That's just not something that has worked very well. So that's why we've skipped over the feedback stuff and gone down to we're going to have to control it for them.
Do they see the cost benefit? I mean, is it cheaper? Is there a way for them to understand that something's cheaper than something else?
It's only theoretical right now, because TVA has not offered us a rate that we can exploit that makes it any cheaper. We're fighting all these battlefronts at once. The technology, a massive electric utility that doesn't want to employ a rate other than the one they have now, which assumes they found the energy genie and there's an infinite amount of it, and we should just sell all of it that we possibly can. So there's still a number of planets that need to line up for that to work.
Yeah, the number of studies on smart grid pilots show that, other than a few dedicated people who are really interested in it, that feedback response doesn't happen. You save maybe $8 to $10 on this low displacement, and it's just not enough to incent the customers. You have to provide some other incentives, and this is what we're arguing about. This G-commerce is to really, that will give them a much bigger tangible reward than saving a few cents on their bill at the end of the month, where there's no real tangible feedback loop.
We're talking about giving them free HBO.
That's what we got to do. That's what they'll respond to.
Anything that you noted that's interesting on the group chat that's gone by? Maybe one. Choose the most interesting one for you.
Well, Brett G mentioned, in terms of the crisis that it would be required to trigger change. He said it would probably have to be a crisis of the elite, meaning of the North. And the reality there, look for a series we did in the Times in 2007 called The Climate Divide, which indicated very clearly that the rich, technologically able countries of the world are already insulating themselves from climate risks. We do it in many different ways. The poorest countries of the world near the equator are totally sitting ducks and have had no history of contributing emissions to the climate problem. So the chances of the big bad bang hitting the elite are relatively low, except maybe in Australia.
Okay. Terry Huval has one quick one. Excuse me, I'm just going to, we're fighting the clock, or we're working with the clock here. Terry, rapid one.
Yes, thank you. We have invested in a program with our university to build a self-sustaining home. And so in working with the university, we're learning about solar power. And to make solar power work, you would have to charge about 3 times more than our normal bill to a customer. In fact, the economics of it are such that at what we charge for electricity in our area, which is 9 cents per kilowatt hour, that the solar panel would pay for itself in over 80 years. But the solar panel only lasts 20 years. So until we get the economics to work, it's not, you're right, we'll have to have something to steady in. And what people need to realize is that to make all this happen, energy prices are going to have to increase to threefold over what they are now to get to the point where these things will pay for themselves. And that's where the biggest concern is. And I think the public needs to understand that, yes, we need to focus on these issues, but there is a cost, a substantial cost to make the economics work to find these renewable approaches.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
To me, that represents the classic, what I call the megawatt mindset. For a utility, you're absolutely right, is that solar panels are way too expensive compared to other sources of power. But there's other solutions. And one, for example, is a group of people who we're looking at is all these devices, all things we have them on a separate solar power charger. Get rid of all those dongles with all their vampire loads and all those things to keep your TV going and so forth. Put them on a separate circuit that's charged by solar panel. Then the cost of power does not become into the equation. You can have this full panel on your roof and so forth. These are the types of things we've got to do instead of getting away as just energy is one common thing coming with a big utility. We've got to divide the problem up and find smaller solutions.
Yeah.
One last
big
quick.
utility is a matter of what the cost is. Those are the real costs. And as long as people understand that, that's fine. We just need to let people know what the real costs are, I believe.
But there's one last end run potentially around that, which is to lower the cost of the alternatives through not just by pricing the expensive energy. Go to .earth, or just someone Google for green jobs engineers and Revkin and .earth, DOTEARTH, and you'll see this graph of how disinvested this country and the rest of the OECD countries are in basic R&D on energy. It's a scandal. You look at, we had a space race, we had a war on cancer, tens of billions of dollars a year flowed into those things, and we have had not even close to the war on energy. It's $1 billion a year in the U.S., and now so doubling that is 2, and it's a fraction of what most energy experts say would be needed, and that's a tiny percentage. Think of that compared to the $600 billion or whatever it would be to impose on the economy to shift things that way. So an energy revolution is possible with not a lot of money, and that's another way to lower the cost of the solar panel improvement and get the same change.
And that is a great way to segue into the next panel, which is going to be about the several $100 billion that can be applied to various infrastructures around and related to broadband and energy. And so I'd like to thank, we're really fortunate to have Andy Revkin, Billy Ray, and Bill St. Arnaud on the same panel.